The scent of lavender and old books usually comforted Sarah. It was the aroma of her small, two-bedroom house, a sanctuary she had meticulously curated over 2 decades. Each morning, sunlight, often timid in the coastal town, would filter through the lace curtains of her kitchen, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air as she prepared her tea. Her life was a quiet melody, a predictable rhythm of gardening, volunteering at the local library, and solitary walks along the pebble-strewn beach where the waves whispered secrets of bygone eras. 10 years. A decade had passed since the day that had, for a time, made her a local curiosity, a reluctant hero. The memory, though softened by time, remained vivid. A sun-drenched afternoon at Willow Creek Lake, the cacophony of children's laughter, the glint of sunlight on water. And then, the sudden, piercing shriek. A small boy, no older than 7, his arms flailing, his face a mask of terror as he slipped beneath the surface. Sarah, a strong swimmer since her own childhood, hadn't hesitated. The cold shock of the water, the desperate pull of his small hands, the burning in her lungs as she dragged him, sputtering and coughing, back to the muddy bank. His parents, frantic, overwhelmed with gratitude, had offered tearful thanks. They were passing through, they'd said, on a cross-country trip. Names were exchanged in the ensuing chaos of concerned onlookers and the arrival of paramedics, but then, like a pebble dropped in a vast ocean, they had vanished from her life. She never saw the boy or his family again. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would wonder what became of him, that small, dark-haired child whose life had so briefly, so intensely, brushed against hers. Did he remember? Probably not. Children forget. Her garden was her pride, a riot of colors in the summer and a testament to resilience in the cooler months. Roses climbed the weathered trellis by her porch, their perfume a sweet greeting. Inside, photographs lined the mantelpiece, her late parents, smiling serenely, her with friends from college, their faces young and hopeful, a faded picture of a much younger Sarah standing proudly beside a towering redwood. These were the anchors of her existence, the silent witnesses to a life lived with quiet integrity. The library where she volunteered 3 times a week was another haven. The hushed reverence for words, the gentle rustle of turning pages, the shared pursuit of knowledge and escape, it all resonated deeply within her. She knew most of the regulars, their reading habits, their little quirks. Mr. Henderson, who only read spy novels, young Lily, who devoured fairy tales, Mrs. Peterson, who always sought out the largest print books on gardening. Sarah found a simple, profound satisfaction in connecting people with stories, in being a small part of their journey into other worlds. That particular Tuesday began like any other. The sky was an undecided canvas of grey and pale blue. She tended her small vegetable patch, pulling out a few stubborn weeds, her hands comfortably caked with rich earth. Later, after a light lunch, she'd settled into her worn armchair with a new biography, the scent of her Earl Grey tea mingling with the familiar lavender and old books. The house was still, save for the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound as constant and reassuring as her own heartbeat. She felt a familiar contentment, a sense of peace that had been hard-won after the turbulence of her earlier years. What happened next shattered that peace into a million terrifying shards. It started subtly. A faint, acrid smell, almost imperceptible at first, worming its way into her nostrils, cutting through the pleasant aroma of her tea. Sarah wrinkled her nose, initially dismissing it as something drifting in from outside, perhaps a neighbor's barbecue, though it was an odd time of day for that. She tried to refocus on her book, but the smell persisted, growing stronger, sharper. An uneasy feeling began to prickle at the edges of her awareness. She put her book down, her brow furrowed. Then came the sound. A soft, almost shy crackling, like dry leaves being crushed underfoot. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the kitchen. Sarah rose from her chair, a knot of apprehension tightening in her stomach. "Hello," she called out, a ridiculous notion that perhaps a squirrel had gotten in somehow, though she knew her house was secure. The only response was another crackle, louder this time, accompanied by a faint, ominous pop. She walked towards the kitchen, her steps hesitant. As she reached the doorway, a wave of heat washed over her face, stealing her breath. Her eyes widened in horror. Flames, angry and orange, were licking up the wall behind the stove, already reaching for the wooden cabinet above. A thick, black smoke was beginning to billow towards the ceiling, casting a terrifying, flickering shadow across the familiar checkered linoleum floor. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her. For a frozen moment, she just stared, her mind struggling to comprehend the impossible reality before her. Her kitchen, the heart of her home, was being devoured. The fire alarm, blessedly, shrieked into life, its piercing wail a desperate call to action that finally jolted her from her stupor. Her first instinct was to fight it. The fire extinguisher. Where was it? Under the sink. She lunged for it, her hands fumbling with the latch, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. But as she turned back, the flames had already spread with terrifying speed, consuming the curtains, leaping across the countertop. The smoke was thicker now, acrid and choking, burning her eyes and throat. It was too much, too fast. She realized with a sickening lurch of terror that she couldn't fight this. She had to get out. She turned to flee, but the smoke was a bewildering, disorienting fog. Which way was the back door? Her lungs screamed for clean air. Coughing, sputtering, her eyes streaming, she stumbled through the dining room, her hand outstretched, searching for a familiar wall, a landmark in the encroaching darkness. The heat was becoming intense, a physical presence pressing in on her. "Help," she choked out, her voice a raw, desperate whisper. "Somebody, help me." Outside, the peaceful afternoon had been rent asunder. Mrs. Henderson from across the street, who had been watering her petunias, was the first to see the smoke. A thin, grey tendril at first, then a darker plume, then an unmistakable, terrifying billow. Her gasp was swallowed by the sudden, urgent shriek of Sarah's smoke alarm. Dropping her watering can with a clatter, she yelled for her husband, her voice tight with alarm. "George! Fire! Sarah's house is on fire!" Others began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion and the acrid smell now polluting the neighborhood air. A small crowd gathered on the sidewalk, their faces etched with concern and helplessness. Cell phones appeared, frantic calls made to emergency services. The distant wail of sirens was a faint promise, but the fire was a present, rapidly escalating threat. Inside, Sarah had reached the living room, but the smoke was so thick she could barely see. The path to the front door, usually so clear, seemed a treacherous, invisible maze. Panic was a clawing beast, threatening to overwhelm her. She dropped to her knees, remembering some half-forgotten fire safety drill, "Stay low, the air is clearer near the floor." The heat was a searing blanket. She crawled, feeling her way, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Her mind, a maelstrom of fear, flashed images of her cherished belongings, her photographs, her books, all being consumed. But overriding everything was the primal urge to survive. Among the onlookers, a figure detached himself from the concerned huddle. He was a teenager, perhaps 16 or 17, tall and lean, with a shock of dark hair falling over his forehead. Ethan Riley. He lived a few doors down with his parents, a quiet, somewhat reserved kid who mostly kept to himself. He'd been mowing his lawn when the first wisps of smoke caught his attention. Now, he stood watching, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the burning house with an intensity that set him apart from the other, more passively distressed, neighbors. He saw the way the flames were starting to lick at the window frames of the living room, the way the smoke pulsed from beneath the eaves. He heard the muffled, terrified coughs that seemed to carry from within. While others wrung their hands or filmed with their phones, a different kind of urgency seized him. He knew Sarah, not well, just a polite hello when they passed on the street. She was the nice lady with the pretty garden. And she was in there. The sirens were closer now, but not close enough. Every second counted. He saw the front door, flames just beginning to curl around its edges. He made a decision, a sudden, stark clarity cutting through the surrounding chaos. He started to move, first a quick walk, then a run, straight toward Sarah's porch. "Hey, kid! "What are you doing?" someone yelled, a note of alarm in their voice. "The firefighters are almost here." Ethan didn't stop. He didn't acknowledge them. His focus was absolute. He reached the porch steps, taking them two at a time. The heat radiating from the door was intense. He tried the knob. Locked. He could hear a faint, desperate sound from inside, a whimpering cough. There was no time to wait. What happened next was a blur of adrenaline and desperate force. He stepped back, gauged the distance, and then threw his shoulder against the door. The wood groaned but held. He did it again, harder this time, a grunt of exertion tearing from his throat. The frame splintered. One more kick, a powerful, targeted impact near the lock, and the door burst inward with a rending crack, a blast of superheated, smoke-filled air erupting from the opening. Without hesitation, Ethan plunged into the inferno. The smoke was a physical blow, instantly blinding and choking. He pulled his t-shirt up over his nose and mouth, squinting against the acrid sting. "Sarah," he yelled, his voice hoarse. "Can you hear me? Where are you?" The heat was like a furnace. Flames were everywhere, devouring furniture, climbing walls, the roar a deafening, terrifying symphony of destruction. He could barely see a foot in front of him. He dropped lower, remembering the same fire safety advice Sarah had clung to. The air was marginally better near the floor, but still thick with toxic fumes. "Sarah," he called again, louder, his voice cracking. And then he heard it, a weak moan, to his left, near where he thought the sofa was. He crawled towards the sound, his hand sweeping the floor in front of him. His fingers brushed against fabric, then an arm. He found her, curled on the floor, semi-conscious, her face smudged with soot, her breathing shallow. "I've got you," he gasped, his own lungs burning. He hooked his arms under hers, trying to lift her. She was heavier than he expected, a dead weight. Adrenaline surged through him, lending him a desperate strength. He pulled, dragged, his muscles screaming in protest, his eyes streaming. He had to get her out. He had to. The journey back to the doorway was an eternity of searing heat, choking smoke, and blind, desperate effort. He bumped into unseen obstacles, stumbled, but never loosened his grip. The roar of the fire was in his ears, the image of Sarah's still form seared into his mind. He could feel the skin on his arms and face prickling from the intense heat. Finally, he saw it, the jagged rectangle of the broken doorway, a promise of breathable air, of safety. He burst out onto the porch, dragging Sarah with him, collapsing onto the relatively cooler wood, gasping for air. Hands reached for them, pulling them further away from the inferno, onto the lawn. Sarah coughed violently, a deep, racking sound, as fresh air hit her lungs. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused, bewildered. She was lying on the grass, cool and damp beneath her. Faces swam above her, concerned neighbors, the sound of approaching sirens now deafeningly close. And then, a younger face, soot-streaked, anxious, hovering directly over hers. Her rescuer. The boy. Paramedics were suddenly there, oxygen masks, questions, gentle hands checking her vital signs. She felt a strange detachment, her mind still reeling from the terror, the smoke, the suffocating heat. The world was a confusing blur of noise and motion. But through it all, her gaze kept returning to the teenager who now sat a few feet away, also being attended to, coughing, his t-shirt singed, his face grimed with soot but his eyes clear and steady. The firefighters, a whirlwind of professional efficiency, were attacking the blaze, hoses uncoiling, water arcing against the flames. The immediate danger to her life had passed, thanks to this young man, this stranger who had risked his own. Slowly, as the oxygen cleared her head and the shock began to recede, a sense of profound, overwhelming gratitude washed over her. She tried to sit up. A paramedic gently restrained her. "Easy now. Just breathe." The boy, she managed to rasp, her throat raw. Is he okay?" "He's a brave young man," the paramedic said, glancing towards Ethan. "Took in some smoke, but he'll be all right. He saved your life." Sarah looked at Ethan again. He was watching her, a strange, unreadable expression on his young face. His dark hair was matted with sweat and soot. There was something about his eyes, the set of his jaw, even beneath the grime, that tugged at a distant, almost forgotten chord in her memory. A flicker of something, too elusive to grasp. She coughed again, then took a clearer breath. "Thank you," she said, her voice still weak but filled with an emotion so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "You saved me." I don't know how to thank you." Ethan just nodded, then slowly got to his feet, shrugging off a paramedic's attempt to make him sit longer. He walked over to where Sarah lay on a stretcher, now being prepared for transport to the hospital for observation. He stood looking down at her, the chaotic scene of firefighting and concerned neighbors fading into the background for a moment. He wiped a smear of soot from his cheek with the back of his hand. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, almost diffident, yet carried a strange weight. "Are you Sarah Collins?" She blinked, surprised by the direct question. "Yes. Yes, I am." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It was a smile that seemed to hold a universe of unspoken things. He crouched down beside her. The noise of the water cannons and shouting firefighters seemed to recede. "I recognized you," he said softly, his dark eyes fixed on hers. Even with all this, he gestured vaguely at her soot-stained face and disheveled state. Sarah frowned, confused. "Recognized me? Do I know you?" His face was vaguely familiar, like someone seen in passing, a neighbor's son, perhaps. But his intensity suggested something more. He looked down for a moment, then met her gaze again. "It was a long time ago. Willow Creek Lake. I was just a kid, 7 years old. I fell in. I was drowning." Sarah's breath hitched. Her heart seemed to stop, then restart with a painful jolt. Willow Creek Lake. 7 years old. The dark hair, the intense eyes, could it be? The memory, so often revisited in her quiet moments, flooded back with an astonishing, almost painful clarity. The small, terrified face, the desperate grip of his little hands. Her eyes widened, disbelief warring with a dawning, incredible realization. You were that little boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, the small smile still there, a mixture of shyness and something else, something profound. "Yeah. That was me. My parents and we were just passing through. You pulled me out." He paused, and his next word seemed to hang in the air, imbued with a significance that resonated deep within Sarah's soul, a significance that transcended the smoke, the fire, the chaos around them. "I always remembered your face," he said, his voice gaining a quiet confidence. "I never forgot what you did. Today was my turn." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah stared at him, speechless, tears now streaming freely down her face, mingling with the soot. The boy she had saved, the child whose fate she had often wondered about, had reappeared in her life at the moment of her greatest peril, not as a child, but as a courageous young man, to repay a debt she never knew was still owed, a debt she had never considered a debt at all. The paramedics began to lift her stretcher. As they carried her towards the waiting ambulance, her eyes remained locked on Ethan. He stood there, a soot-covered, singed guardian angel, watching her go. The sounds of the firefight, the shouts, the hiss of water, all faded into a distant hum. All she could see was his face, the face of the boy she had rescued, now the face of the young man who had, in an astonishing, unbelievable turn of fate, rescued her. "My turn," the words echoed in her mind, a profound testament to the unseen threads that connect human lives across the vast expanse of time. The hospital visit was, thankfully, brief. Sarah had suffered some smoke inhalation and minor burns to her hands, but nothing life-threatening. The doctors said she was lucky, incredibly lucky. Ethan, too, was checked over and released, his injuries even more superficial than hers. As she lay in the sterile white room, the events of the day replayed in her mind like a surreal dream. Her house, her sanctuary, was severely damaged, perhaps beyond repair. Her belongings, her cherished memories in physical form, were mostly gone, turned to ash and ruin. A wave of grief, sharp and sudden, washed over her for those losses. But then, the image of Ethan's face, his quiet words, "Today was my turn," would return, and an entirely different emotion would swell within her, an emotion so powerful it overshadowed the sorrow. Awe. Gratitude. A profound sense of wonder at the intricate, mysterious workings of fate. Later that evening, temporarily housed with her kind neighbors, the Hendersons, Sarah learned more about the fire's aftermath. The firefighters had managed to save the basic structure of her house, but the interior was gutted. The news of Ethan's heroism, and the incredible story of their past connection, had already begun to spread like wildfire itself through the small community. People were stunned, moved, inspired. The next day, Ethan came to visit her at the Hendersons' house. He was cleaned up, his hair neatly combed, though a few faint scratches were still visible on his cheek. He looked younger now, more like the teenager he was, yet there was a newfound maturity in his eyes, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before, or perhaps she just hadn't noticed it. They sat in the Henderson sunroom, a plate of cookies untouched between them. For a few moments, an awkward silence hung in the air. What could one say to the person who had, for the second time in their intertwined lives, been an instrument of profound, life-altering intervention? Sarah finally broke the silence. "Ethan," she began, her voice still a little hoarse, "I've been trying to find the words, but thank you just seemed so small for what you did. You saved my life. You ran into a burning building for me." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his hands. "Anyone would have done it," he mumbled, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Many had stood and watched. He had acted. "No," Sarah said gently but firmly. "Not everyone. What you did was extraordinarily brave. And then, to find out it was you or the little boy from the lake." She shook her head, still struggling to fully absorb the reality of it. "I thought about you, you know, over the years. Wondered where you were, what you were doing. If you were happy." A faint blush rose on Ethan's cheeks. "I remembered you too," he admitted, finally meeting her eyes. "Really clearly. Your face, mostly. And the way you held my head up out of the water. My parents, they talked about you sometimes. The angel lady who saved me. We moved around a bit after that, but when we settled here a few years ago, and I saw you in the neighborhood, I knew it was you straight away. I just never knew how to, you know, say anything. So, all this time, you lived just a few doors down, and you knew?" Sarah asked, a sense of wonder filling her. He nodded. "I guess I was always kind of waiting for a chance. Not like this," he added quickly, a shadow crossing his face as he thought of the fire. "I never wanted anything bad to happen to you. But when I saw the smoke yesterday, and I knew you were in there, it was like I just knew what I had to do. It felt like something I was supposed to do." "Today was my turn," Sarah quoted him softly, the words still sending shivers down her spine. "It's the most incredible thing I've ever heard." They talked for a long time that afternoon. Ethan spoke about his life, his plans to study engineering, his quiet passion for fixing things. Sarah, in turn, shared stories from her own life, filling in the gaps of the years since their first, dramatic encounter. A bond was forged, or perhaps, reforged, in the aftermath of the fire, a connection that was both old and new, built on a shared history of life-saving moments. The community rallied around Sarah. Donations poured in, offers of help to rebuild, or to find a new home. The story of Sarah and Ethan became a local legend, a testament to courage, to fate, to the enduring power of a single good deed. It was reported in the local newspaper, then picked up by regional news outlets. For a brief time, they were both, once again, figures of public interest. Ethan, much like Sarah a decade earlier, was hailed as a hero, an accolade he bore with a quiet, unassuming modesty. What happened next was a slow process of healing and rebuilding, both physically and emotionally. Sarah, with the support of her community and the unexpected, profound comfort of her re-established connection with Ethan, began to piece her life back together. The house, her beloved home, was indeed too damaged to salvage completely. But as she stood before its charred remains one day, a strange sense of peace settled over her. It was just a house. The memories, the love, the essence of what it represented, those things were not lost. They lived on within her, and now, they were part of a larger, more extraordinary story. Ethan became a regular visitor. He helped sort through the salvageable items from the wreckage, his youthful energy a surprising comfort. He was no longer just the quiet boy from down the street, he was a friend, a confidant, a living, breathing symbol of hope and the cyclical nature of kindness. Sarah watched him, this young man on the cusp of his own life, and saw not just the hero who had saved her, but also the small, vulnerable boy she had once held in her arms, his life a fragile thing she had been privileged to protect. The fire had taken much, but it had also given something extraordinary. It had brought a past act of kindness full circle in the most dramatic and affirming way imaginable. It had revealed the hidden potential for courage in a quiet teenager and had reminded an entire community that the connections we forge, even those that seem fleeting, can have repercussions that echo through the years, returning to us in forms we could never anticipate. What happened next, over the following months and years, was the quiet unfolding of lives touched by an extraordinary event. Sarah eventually found a new, smaller home, closer to the library she loved. Ethan went off to college, pursuing his engineering dreams, but he always stayed in touch, their bond unbreakable. The story served as a powerful reminder that heroism isn't always planned, sometimes it's a spontaneous act of courage driven by a deep-seated sense of empathy or, as in Ethan's case, a long-held memory of a debt of gratitude. It highlighted the resilience of the human spirit, the ability to find light even in the darkest of times, to rebuild from ashes. What truly resonated was the profound, almost mystical symmetry of their shared experience. A life saved, then a life returned, a decade apart. It spoke to the idea that our actions, big or small, ripple outwards, creating effects we may never witness, yet sometimes, in rare and beautiful moments, those ripples return to shore. So, what is the lesson in this incredible chain of events? Perhaps it is that no good deed, no matter how small or seemingly forgotten, is ever truly wasted. It plants a seed, and sometimes, against all odds, that seed blossoms in the most unexpected and beautiful way. It teaches us that courage resides in unexpected hearts, and that the instinct to help, to save, is one of humanity's most profound and redeeming qualities. Remember Sarah and Ethan. Remember that the boy saved by a stranger became the man who saved her in turn. Their story is a testament to the enduring power of human connection, a reminder that the compassion we extend to others can create echoes that last a lifetime, and sometimes, even save one. Never underestimate the impact you can have on another person's life. For you never know when your turn will come, either to give help, or, perhaps, to receive it from a most unexpected hand, guided by a memory you helped create. Share this story, and let it inspire you to look for the opportunities to make a difference, however small they may seem. Because in the grand, interconnected tapestry of human existence, every thread matters. Every act of kindness counts.